All right, we are live. I have not done a live reading in a little while. It has been quite a while since I've done a live reading. Recently, I've been wanting to read some more actual literature versus the technical articles or just things online that I enjoy reading, but understandably is of low literary quality. Uh, so I actually went to the Houston Public Library and they have a very large Chinese section, the one in downtown at least. And I got Eileen Chang's book, Naked Earth. So to give you some context here, Eileen Chang, or Zhang Eileen, as she is known in Chinese, is a extremely well-known uh, essayist, novelist, screenwriter. Here, let me just share this little screen here. I don't think I have typically done this, so I want to present a little background on the author before I continue. So born September 30th, 1920, died September 8th, 1995. She was born into an aristocratic lineage and educated bilingually in both English and Chinese in Shanghai. And after the communists defeated the nationalists in the Chinese Civil War, which I'm not going to go into, but suffice to say, given that she was a highly intellectual person coming from a wealthy background, that would not have been a good place for her to be. So she left the country. And so during the late 1970s, early 1980s, she rose to literary prominence in basically every Chinese-speaking part of, the world. So, and there is a whole lot of background here, suffice to say. There's she's very, very well educated. But what about this particular book, right? What has happened? What is up with this Naked Earth book, right? The one that I'm referring to here. So the Naked Earth book, this one was not available in English for many years, I would say, over 50 years. And it was actually, so it has an interesting history here. So wrote Naked Earth at the direct request of the USIS, which is the United States Information Services, and USIS was the U.S. government agency devoted to propaganda, which operated from 1953 to 1999. I did not even know this organization existed. But anyways, so they promoted United States interests overseas. So she wrote two anti-communist books during this time, The Rice Sprout Song, 1955 novel, and so this is called Qiu Ge in Chinese. And then The Naked Earth is 赤地之恋, which directly in English would be translated as Love in Red Land. But I suppose, they just call it Naked Earth here. So she originally wrote this in English, but then I guess she translated it in Chinese and actually got it published in Taiwan. And then, so this Naked Earth was written actually at the direct request of the United States Information Services and used a plot outline supplied by USIS agents. So the book is according to the academic Brian DeMere, the book is a consequence of the anti-communist paranoia of the United States Cold War mentality and lacks the poetry and nuance of Chang's other work. Well, are we sure about that? I guess we shall see. So I'm going to read parts of this, and no doubt in the future could read more of some of her other works, which we could say is not necessarily influenced by the USIS to this degree. So yeah, and for some others, she also some of you may have heard of like the movie, I guess that came out a number of years ago, Lust Caution. That was actually based on one of her novellas as well. So she's written quite a bit, very prolific. So with all that said, let me just jump back to actually reading this book and then seeing where things go from here. So let's see here. Now, typically I suppose you just observe me reading. Is that the best way we want to approach this, or should I put some words up? What do we think here? I don't even know if anybody's watching this, but let me see. Wonder if I could find the Naked Earth somewhere on, but I am reading from a actual book, so that lends itself to have some issues. So I think what I'm gonna do is just put this up. Yeah, I'm gonna put this up actually, and I will just, oops, not here. And just put this here, and then this will be, I will go from here. So, Naked Earth Introduction by Perry Lane. All right. It can be embarrassing for a Chinese scholar like me to read Eileen Chang's pellucid prose written more than 60 years ago on the early years of the People's Republic of China. How many cudgels to the head did I need before arriving at comparable clarity? My disillusioning first trip to China in 1973, my reading of the devastating journalism of Liu Bianyun in 1980, observations of ball lies in action at the Tiananmen massacre in 1989, and imprisonment of a Nobel Peace Laureate in more recent times? Did I need all of this and more before catching up with where Chang was in 1953 in her understanding of the language and politics in communist China, how things worked in daily life beneath the blankets of jargon? In graduate school, I did not take Naked Earth and its sister novel, The Rice Sprout Spring, also published in 1954, very seriously. People said the works had a KMT nationalist government bias. How silly. Readers of NYRB classics will know Chang as the author of Loving a Falling City, a collection of her best-known stories from the 1940s, finally translated by Karen Kingsbury and delightful for their evocative language, psychological insight, moral acuity, and close observation of Chang's social milieu, the Chinese urban elite. In Naked Earth and the Rice Sprout Song, Chang turns her attention to the years 1949 to 1953, and she writes about parts of China, agricultural villages, a communist newspaper office, soldiers in the Korean War, that were new to her. Given her background, one might ask how she could make this transition as smoothly as she did. Certainly, her skill in imagining the private thoughts of people as they interact, so expertly honed in her earlier fiction, continues to serve her well. In addition, she seems, like George Orwell, to have almost a sixth sense for immediate comprehension of what an authoritarian political system would do to human beings in daily life. She looks past the grand political system itself, showing little care to rebut it on its own terms. She focuses instead on the lives of people, how they feel and behave as they adapt to what the system forces upon them. Still, a question remains of how Chang could know about land reform in the Chinese countryside, or about the Korean War without first-hand experience of these events. Perhaps sensing a need to address this question, Chang writes in prefaces to both The Rice Sprout Song and Naked Earth that the novels are based on true stories. She had never offered similar assurances about her earlier stories. Chang did travel to rural China, at least briefly, in the years immediately before and after 1949, but most of the material for her novels seemed to come from second-hand accounts or from published sources. Self-criticisms by officials and descriptions of families had appeared after combing for political correctness in the state-run press. Chang could read past the propaganda overlay and infer what had happened. She also appeared to have learned from The Sun Shines Over the Songgan River, Ting Ling's party-approved long novel, published in 1948 and winner of the Stalin Prize in 1951, about land reform in communist-held areas in the 1940s. Chang Qingfen had noted a broad range of intertextuality between Songgan River and Naked Earth on questions that range from how farmers wash their hands to what public struggle sessions look like. The main difference is only that Ting Ling feels a continual need to invent model behavior, while Chang does not. Chang shows how the linguistic grid of a communist land reform campaign descends on a village like a giant cookie cutter. There are poor farmers, middling farmers, landlords, bad elements, and more. Formal terms are capitalized in this translation. When actual life doesn't fit the prescriptions, so much the worse for actual life. Make it fit. A cadre, a technical term for a functionary in the communist system, complains that the farmers have always been backward. All they ever see is a bit of material advantage right in front of them. This leaves them afraid to be active. Perhaps they don't want to be active? No, answers the organization. They're reticent only because they fear the revenge of the remnant feudal forces. When finally coaxed to complain, they sometimes, complain about the cadres, not the landlords. Eventually, the farmers, like everyone else, figure out that their personal interests depend on correct verbal performance. There are certain things you're supposed to say in certain ways you're supposed to say them. Tell the truth is a command that you recite your lies correctly. Unimpeachable exterior becomes everyone's goal. One young woman suffers a Tory criticism session, ends it with a self-denunciation, and then steals away to weep in solitude. Someone discovers her and accuses of only pretending to accept criticism. Thinking quickly, she explains that no, hers are tears of gratitude. Everybody was so concerned about me, so enthusiastic in helping me to make progress. Does your explanation pass muster? Yes, but less because it's credible than because it reinforces the exterior mask that says, I submit to the organization. To powers that be, that demonstration is more important than what she actually thinks. Over time, the need to maintain a correct exterior turns public political language into a kind of chess game. You make moves in order to get what you want, and you avoid bad moves that will bring punishment. During the Three Anti campaign in 1951, when nearly all communist cadres are scrutinized for corruption, waste, or bureaucratism, Ko Shan, a party member and a newspaper manager in public, but a tubercular nymphomaniac, in C.T. Shah's apt phrase, in private, is forced onto a stage for self-criticism. He says this. I have nothing to say in my own defense. I feel very much ashamed that even now, even after so many years spent in the very nucleus of the struggle, even now there still exists in my consciousness certain bad traits of the petit bourgeois. I have this tendency toward freedom and looseness. And then, when I fought in the guerrillas, I got into the guerrilla style of behavior. Ever since then, I found it hard to regularize my life. Now, the matter of man-woman relations. My starting point was comradely love, but it has gone out of bounds and has led to obscure behavior. The crowd who's listening to her is aware that her oration is only a series of chess moves aimed at minimizing punishment. There is prurient interest, though, in the question of illicit lovers. People heckle her to name them. Trapped before the masses, Koshan needs to betray at least one lover, but which one? Liu Chuan, the young protagonist of Naked Earth, whom Koshan has recently seduced despite their difference in age, is in the crowd listening and is terrified that he will be named. It's Sean Li, Koshan finally says, choosing not to name Liu. Sean is a slick official whom the reader already knows to be contemptible. We feel relief that Koshan, however cynical, retains at least enough humanity to protect the naive Liu. But no, it turns out, when Liu later visits Koshan's house to thank her, she explains that I mentioned Chan instead of you because I could trust him not to get me into a bigger mess than what I am in already, which is more than I can say for you. She had named Chan because he was better at manipulating the language game, that's all. It had been another self-interested chess move on her part. Liu then asked her why Chan, who was also present in the meeting, had not shouted out Liu Chuan too in order to split the blame. Could it be that Chan, for his part, had a bit of humanity somewhere inside him? What good would that do him? Koshan responds. He would just make an enemy without making things any easier for himself. Chan too had made a cold chess move, and nothing more. Eileen Chang's acute observation of political language in China in the early 1950s is useful in understanding patterns that have persisted ever since. Maoist extremism has passed, but it remains true that an incorrect word performance in public can be costly to a person's interests, and it's still the case that one person can earn credit by reporting the misstatements of another. When Liu volunteers to fight in Korea, escaping the political cauldron of Shanghai, he notices that he feels watched even after moving abroad. He wondered if anybody who had lived under communist rule could ever feel unwatched again. And indeed, in 2015, Chinese graduate students in California still keep non-standard political views under wraps when speaking in the company of other Chinese students. Only among well-trusted friends does one venture to live in truth, in Václav Havel's phrase. In the early 1950s, Liu and his girlfriend, Su Nan, inhabit the cozy little igloo of their love, made of ice but warm and homely within. Today, the igloos are not so frozen to the ground, but are still there. And the people on top, the system's beneficiaries, perhaps they, at least, are free of worry? Here, too, Chan is clairvoyant. Near the end of Naked Earth, Liu reflects that as long as one man like him remains alive and out of jail, the men who rule China would never be safe. They're afraid too, he thought, afraid of the people they rule by fear. Had Liu foreseen that in 2015, those men who rule China will still be spending hundreds of billions of yuan annually on stability maintenance? Chan seems even to foresee that paradoxical connection between communism and luxury that have emerged recently in China. After normal human values have shriveled, where does a human being turn to measure success? Only material scales remain. And in Naked Earth, we see already how officials in the regime have begun to take this route. Villas, banquets, concubines. Chan died in 1995. How surprised would she be to see the stupendous wealth of the communist super elite today? The distinguished journalist Tai Ching has suggested that the Communist Party failed to buy off Chan, even with lures like member of the Political Consultative Conference or vice chair of the National People's Congress. I cannot vouch that such offers to Chan were made, but Tai Ching, who grew up in the family of Marshal Ye Qingheng, who was a confederate of Mao Zedong, had considerable credibility on such topics. What we do know is that Chan accepted a grant from the United States Information Service, USIS, to write The Rice Sprout Song and Naked Earth after she left China in 1952. This fact has been widely noted and significance sometimes exaggerated. It is far-fetched to imagine that the USIS distorted Chan's writing. She is too powerful a writer for that, too immune from being tricked, in Tai Ching's phrase. Indeed, there is irony in the fact that the US government still has not collected what it paid for. Its understanding of the language and politics of Chinese communism still lags far behind what Chan offered it 60 years ago. If nothing else, the beauty of Chan's writing makes it hard to view as anyone's propaganda. After a rain squall on a dusty Loess plateau, trees were still sniffling and shedding big tears. At a nearby river, long wisps of yellow mud trailed sluggishly in the current, like half-beaten egg yolk. On the whole, Naked Earth has less of this than Chan's 1940 novellas do, but it would be a mistake to view this change as a compromise with USIS style. Chang has matured in this novel to a sparser naturalism, to a plane where the shimmer of the unsaid, in Merriam-Moore's phrase, can say even more than brilliant metaphor does. All right, that was Perry Link, who wrote that wonderful forenote for introduction. So Eileen Chang, Eileen herself, wrote an author's note for this book. So I'm going to read that, the author's note. It sometimes happens that when I describe one of my stories, I am met with a puzzled look. This really happened, I say, maybe a touch defensively, as if that automatically increases the story's worth. Of course, whether a story is good or not really has nothing to do with whether it's true or not. Even so, I've become almost compulsively fixated on reality, believing that real experience, no matter whose, will never become stale, but will remain always fresh and evocative. Naked Earth is based on real people and their true stories. Fiction is a heart, not reportage, however, and in this novel, I've changed the names of characters, and in some places, I've drawn from many stories and compressed, trimmed, and reorganized them into the story you read here. As large as my canvas is, I can't help but fall short of showing everything going on in China today. The recent 5 anti-campaign, for example, appears nowhere in my book, but has affected the lives of ordinary people even more profoundly than did the 3 anti-campaign. I was limited as well by the limits of my characters' perspectives. Not that my aim was ever to cover absolutely everything. It was instead to capture the atmosphere of the time as best I could. The book is not intended to be a comprehensive report. My hope is that readers, in turning its pages, get a whiff of what real life was like for the people living through those days. Eileen Chang. All right, so I'm not really sure what the 5 anti-campaign is. My historical background, I suppose, needs some work here in terms of the Chinese history, but I'm sure it was very significant. But it is not in this book, as John Eileen noted here. So with that, let me actually just go on and read the first chapter, which, all right, so one of these days, if my Chinese ever gets good enough, I hope I can read books like this in actual Chinese without much struggle. So perhaps I will make a video with that depiction. All right, so chapter 1. The yellow dust rolled on, across what was once called the Central Plain because it was considered the center of the world, surrounded by barbarians. Two trucks sped along the highway, one after the other, in two balls of yellow fog. A plump, middle-aged man in a standard civilian liberation suit of bluish-gray cloth stood on the running board of the second truck. He was the driver's assistant. His eyes popped out of his choleric red face as he shouted supplications to the slow, lumbering coal truck just ahead of them. He had shouted himself hoarse, but either his words were drowned in the roar of the engines or the coal truck driver pretended not to hear him. When they had reached a bend in the road, the other truck finally, in a burst of conscience, swung out of the way and let them move up front. Let's still slow down a bit, the assistant said to the driver, so they'll also eat some dust. The driver nodded, hanging on to the window frame with one arm. The assistant turned around to look back, grinning happily. Now and then, his plump face would suddenly go all red and splotchy again with rage, and he would yell back, "Tomato, your turn to eat some dust." The truck full of young people started to laugh. One of them said half seriously, "The driver's Stockholm style is no good. He should go under discussion. Maybe we should call a meeting tonight." He winked at his comrades. They were all students from various universities in Peking. When the people's government mobilized university students to take part in the land reform, all the active elements in the student body vied with each other in signing up. Some of them had just graduated this summer. Liu Chuan, one of the new graduates, sat at the back of the truck where it jolted the worst. He had his arm crossed loosely, elbows resting on his knees. The sun was still broiling hot, though it was already autumn. His bluish-gray summer uniform, soaked through with perspiration, clung in ripple marks on his back. Warm puffs of wind blasted the dust against his face like a flapping, stinging, coarse veil. He frowned and could hardly open his eyes, but he was smiling. He was tall, with a thin dark gold face dimpled on one cheek, and keen, narrow eyes. "The east is red, the sun has risen," Chance produced a Mao Zedong that started singing in a corner up front. With a sudden lurch toward the side of the road, the truck just managed to miss a mule cart coming from the other direction. Half a tree and a big clump of green reeds swept into the open truck and switched against the faces of the riders. The girls shrieked and squealed with laughter, piling on top of one another as they ducked. One of them pulled off a leafy branch from the tree and started to beat time with it on her friend's back as they sang. The same land reform song they had just learned. "Unite, hey, tillers of the land," but they liked the old favorites best, like that one beginning with "Our China so big and wide." The tune was probably adapted from some Russian song. It had the gray, windy sadness that vast spaces bring. The road gradually sank, and the bare, smooth banks on either side kept rising until they stood up sheer like yellow mud walls. The earth was loose and sandy in this part of the country. Every time a mule cart passed with its iron-bound wheels, it dug deep ridges in the road. Centuries of traffic had worn the road into a ditch from 10 to 20 feet deep. Sitting high up on the truck, the students could see the yellowish-green tree tops on the plain. Some of the riders began to complain that their legs had gone to sleep, so they shifted position as best they could. A pretty girl now sat facing this side, framed in a hole in the crowd. Her skin had the bluish, pale translucency of fresh peeled lychee flesh, and her eyes were wide slits in the ripe fruit, showing the moistened, lacquered surface of the purplish black seed within. Liu Chuan looked at her. The fold of her eyelid made a long, deep line, fading out at the end with an upward sweep. The wind had plastered a small green leaf on her hair. She had short hair curling outward a little at the ends. Set against the dully throbbing, changeless yellow countryside, her head and shoulders made a startling little picture, distinct and yet infinitely far away, like a patch of sky reflected in a wayside puddle. Just glancing in her direction once or twice made Liu Chuan feel that everybody's watching him. She was too pretty. Before they got in the truck, they had to each announce their own name and the university they came from, and they usually mumbled it half laughing, feeling that self-introduction is a ridiculous thing if you perform it seriously. But somehow, all the male members of the group had managed to catch Su Nan's name and knew that she was a graduate of Yinchen University. Liu Chuan turned and looked the other way, fanning himself with his cap. Then it occurred to him that this was really superfluous, with the roaring wind blowing straight at him, so he put the cap back on his head. The wind immediately snatched at it. He caught it just in time. He could not remember Sunan talking to anybody, but she looked happy. She was carrying an oil paper umbrella, and she often stuck it out, brushing against a tree so that it kept bouncing back jerkily with a sharp noise like rippling silk. The sleeves of her bluish gray uniform were rolled up above the elbow, showing thin, young arms. The singing died down when throats went dry. The girl who had been beating time with the tree branch was Yuling, a classmate of Liu's. She leaned over and tapped him on the shoulder with her long whip of a bow. Hey, Liu Chuan, she called out. How much longer to go? Because he did not answer at once, the tree branch knocked him on the head. Hey, Liu Chuan, we have covered half the distance, haven't we? He didn't like it much when he saw Sunan looking at him. No use asking me, asked the driver, he said, smiling. Maybe this was nothing between classmates, but other people might misunderstand. They were all cadres now, he told himself. And for a low-ranking cadre, one of the worst offenses was to 闹男女关系, get up man-woman relations. Besides, they were setting out to do a very serious, important job. This kind of telephone would give the leaders the wrong idea. The man who represented the leaders in the group was Comrade Chang Li, a party member and organizer sent down by the Culture Bureau. In his middle 30s, Chang was of medium height with full, long, blue-green cheeks and rather mauvish pink lips. He sat quietly smiling among these effervescent youngsters, trying to get all their names straight. Liu had introduced everyone he knew to Chang. Liu had been active in the Students' Association of Peida, the University of Peking. So, Peida is actually Beida, but I guess the translation has that as Peida. So he had been in constant contact with similar groups in all the other universities. He was also a member of the youth corps and was being considered for admittance into the party. Chang obviously regarded him as a leader among the students and relied on him to maintain order in the group. The dusty, creamy glare of the sun gave them a headache. They all dozed off, sitting back to back, until they were awakened by the soreness at the end of the spine where the jolting hurt them. Thus, they alternated between sleeping and walking, headache, and rump ache. Toward mid-afternoon, it looked like rain. The sun became a furry, soft white spot in the oppressive uniform gray of the sky. The truck was now bouncing along at breakneck speed. Rain would turn the dust into mud as slippery as rice gruel. Wheels wouldn't be able to move an inch in the mire, and it would be disastrous to be stranded in these parts, miles away from anywhere. The driver stepped on the gas. Liu Chuan's last nap was cut short by a burst of song. He looked out the back and saw rain. The drenched young people at the back were singing, defiantly cheerful. The truck had already turned out of the ditch and was running along a narrow lane with broad fields stretching away flatly to the sky on both sides. They passed a gaoliang patch, the stalks fast taller than a man. Gaoliang is sorghum, by the way. It was the season of the green gauze curtain, the affectionate name the farmers gave to late summer gaoliang. Then came cabbage patches and the small humps of burial mounds, an occasional thatched hut. In the greenish twilight of the shower, everything looked dark and clear like preserves swimming in a green glass jar. The driver looked over his shoulder and said something to Comrade Chang. He nodded. We're there! Everybody cheered. The vegetable patches gave way to an endless stretch of yellow mud wall about 10 feet high. In this part of North China, all villages had been walled in protection against brigands. With sudden shouts and clanging cymbals and thumping drums, a crowd of peasants surged forth from a rectangular entrance dug in the wall. White towels tied around the militiamen's heads bobbed behind the soaked and tattered paper flags they were waving. A double file of youth and children moved forward, wriggling the rice sprouts on. The girls had trouble with their sticky, wet silk sashes, which clung to their bodies and legs instead of whirling gracefully around them. The people on the truck, a bit nervous of this noise, could not hear the slogans being shouted. But of course, these were the villagers out to welcome them in spite of the rain. They waved back, shouting, "Thank you, kinsmen," and broke out into the deafening chorus, "Unite, hey, tillers of the land." Meanwhile, the truck had splashed its way through the crowd, pushing them into the field or against walls, their little bamboo flagpoles tilting en masse like wind-blown reeds. When the truck finally pulled to a stop, the crowd had been left behind, but two men who were presumably ganbu, cadres, puffing down along the tailgate, caught up with the track as it slowed down. They were all ready to help everybody down, but seemed a bit put out upon noting the youth and good looks of the girls in the group, fearing criticism if they should appear too eager to hold the young women by the hand. They decided instead to lead the way to the temple where their guests were to be quartered. Sitting on top of a small wooded mound, the vermilion walled temple had two large white vertical signboards on either side of the gate, both saying Primary School of Hanqiao 3rd District. The fast walkers in the welcoming party were catching up now, too, gongs and cymbals clanging thinly in the damp. The land reform workers, their knapsacks on their backs, jumped down from the truck into the mud and hurried after the gambu up the steep, winding steps of crumbling brick. Liu Chuan lingered behind to herd them along. Then he ran up alone, shielding his head with an arm. Midway up the steps, an umbrella tilted over him. Comrade Liu, Sunan said. No, it's all right, Liu said, smiling in perfunctory polite refusal. Then he took the umbrella from her. Let me hold it. After a few steps, he realized he was holding it away from himself, almost the length of his arm. He hadn't been so old-fashioned with the other girls he had known in college, but he was not at ease with Sunan. Water slid off the edge of the umbrella in silvery sheets, dripping on his head. He was considerably worse off than before, and then he also had to slow down his pace. Two could not run as fast as one. Sunan probably noticed his plight. She said nothing, but as they neared the end of the climb, she was walking quite close to him, forcing him to come under the umbrella. Those who had arrived before them were crowded on the porch of the temple, busy shaking their caps and wringing out their trouser leg. Everybody looked up when they came in together. When Liu Chuan went up to talk to the men, he thought he could sense quiet disapproval, then had an uncomfortable feeling that he was becoming super sensitive. Chang Li was surrounded by several village ganbu. He turned to introduce them to the students. The secretary of the party branch office, Paul Xiangchen, go forward Paul. Paul Xiangqian, actually, go forward Paul, as the name obviously adopted after the liberation, was a youngish farmer with thin, bird-like good looks, rather high-shouldered and high-collared white Chinese shirt. Comrades, I wish I could find the words to tell you how happy we are you're coming, Paul said, smiling. All of you have culture. We have a lot to learn from you. Not at all, Chang said. It's we who have to learn from you. You ganbu are closest to the people. The comrades must be hungry, Paul said to Sun Fukui, who had been introduced as the Farmers Association organizer. Tell them to hurry up with the dinner. He turned with an apologetic smile to the land reform workers. Nothing to eat here. We've got 30 quantities of white flour ready and 100 eggs. Didn't dare kill a pig. We weren't sure whether your comrades would be able to get here today. You know, meat won't keep in this weather. John protested. Please don't bother. We'll eat whatever there is. We don't have to eat white flour, Lee joined in. Fact is, you don't have to cook separately for us. We're bored with the farmers. Paul scratched his head and laughed uncertainly, blowing through his teeth. Rain like this, he said after a moment. Better eat here and go to bed early. You comrades must be tired out. Besides, there's no trouble at all. Everything is a hand, added Sun. It seems to me we better not start by taking the opposite stand from the group, Chan said to Liu with a smile. Whatever question comes up, it's got to be united with the actual circumstances. We can't be dead brains set on having our own way. There's also a form of dogmatism. That's also a form of dogmatism, he laughed. Liu was taken aback by the reprimand, which he felt was quite uncalled for. Maybe Chang had resented his speaking up with what might be misconstrued as a tone of authority and thought it was a good idea to snub him before the other students in order to build up his own prestige within the group. Liu noticed Sunan looking at him. She must be thinking that he had been trying to show off. Instead of gaining face, he had lost it. He flushed and took all his willpower to stay smiling. Above all, he must not have said it of him that he could not take criticism. They all went inside the temple and sat down in a dark, deserted schoolroom. Chang asked Paul how many party members they had in the locality. He informed Paul that all the different organizations should hold separate meetings the next day in order to communicate the policy. All the ganbu had turned up in the temple. The chairman of the Farmers Association, the chairman of the Women's Association, the captain of the local militia, the head of the village and his assistant, the party organizer and party propagandizer. Most of them still retained some of their peasant shyness. They squatted quietly at the door listening to the talk. Some squatted outside under the eaves, staring into the rain as they listened. Militiamen scurried in and out, hugging sacks of flour and baskets of eggs. A man brought noodles piled in a high mound in a scarlet-painted wooden basin. The noodles, neatly tied on top with a bit of rose-red paper ribbon, cascaded downwards like thick, limp strands of beige-colored hair. Liu could tell from the man's round-faced, self-effacing look that this was not their ordinary fare at the village. He suddenly felt like a wealthy patron of the temple staying for the night, feasting on butchered meat, desecrating the god worshipped there. Soon he smelled the fragrance of large flat cakes baking in dry pans. Reminding himself that he must not sulk, he said brightly, "Where are the drivers? Nobody has seen them around. I'll go find them. Dinner's about ready," Liu said. He thought it was still raining when he walked down the steps under the trees, which were still sniffling and shedding big tears. But the sky had cleared, and there was in the air a touch of a golden haze of setting sun. The cicadas had just started singing. A bit wheezily, the long syrupy threads of sound ran on unbroken from tree to tree. A knot of people had gathered around the truck parked on the wayside. The rain had washed off the dust from the cab of the truck. Children were peering at their own reflections in the dark green metal doors, aglow with the last rays of the slanting sun. They doubled up, slapping their knees, helpless with laughter, as if they were the funniest looking objects in the world. Men and women, both wearing odd little sleeveless blouses of white cloth, also bent down, peering and giggling, but barking prohibitive phrases of the children. Somehow, it came as a shock to Liu that he could understand the few words that floated up to where he stood, halfway down the steps. Perhaps there had been a moment when he had felt with a guilty twinge that these people were as foreign to him as Malays or Ethiopians. A short girl with greasy shoulder-length hair and broad, savage face, not unattractive, had been squatting beside the truck holding up her baby, trying to make it look at its own mirrored image without much success. A beardless old man with a black basket slung on one arm came up from the rear and stood staring, his brows arched high in surprise on his vacuously handsome smiling face. The old man had been standing there for some moments before a man turned to ask him, "Your son back from the market yet?" The old man hemmed and hawed absent-mindedly as he continued to gape at the truck. "Sold anything?" the other man asked. The old man looked away vaguely, as if he had forgotten some important errand, and at once started across the field. He treaded carefully on the narrow, winding footpath, crossing his bare feet daintily with every step, his blue tatters flapping on the breeze. After he had gone some distance, he glanced back over the shoulder of the truck. He was still smiling, with brows arched high in the same pleased and astonished expression. About 20 yards from there, he looked back again with the same smile and raised brows. The crowd appeared to take no notice of his departure, but presently the man who had spoken to him sniggered, scared him off. Bet you didn't sell any of it," a woman said. "Who buys pork this time of the year? It's neither the New Year nor a festival." "Must be all spoiled in this heat. Over 20 miles to the market and back," said the man. "Spoiled must be cooked," she said. "Crazy to kill pigs at this time of the year." Another man sighed. "Hi, he might as well kill them while the killing's good." Liu instinctively drew behind a tree as if he did not want to risk being seen so he could hear more of it. He must have pushed against a tree trunk, making it shake, because the cicada stopped singing. The people down below stopped talking. They just stood looking at the truck. "Do these people come from the district headquarters or the Xian, the country?" a man finally said. Nobody answered, but another man said, "They'll never be able to get up anything around here. Now, over there in 7 Mile Fort, where there's a big landlord, they sure had fun," he said, giggling. Before they even struggled against the landlord, his red silk padded blankets were already piled on the beds of the gambu. The crowd tittered. While nobody told him to stop blabbing, some of the more prudent people started to move away. "Think I'd go and see if they've sold any of the pork," a man said. "I don't know, but I'd get some and have crescent dumplings for dinner. Might as well." It looked as if soon everybody would be gone, except perhaps the children. Liu came down the steps shouting from far off, "Hey, kinsman, anybody seen the drivers?" They turned startled faces towards the shape coming out of the dark. "I'm looking for the drivers. Anybody know where they've gone?" They began to wander off nonchalantly as if they had not heard him, and the children started to run. Again, Liu had a baffling sense of racial and language barriers between them. But then one of the men turned and pointed down the road. "They're the cooperative," he said. The girl with the baby said worriedly, as if he had uttered some indiscretion, "Let's go home, 孩子,听着, child's dad." She stood watchfully with the baby in her arms, waiting for the man to get safely in front of her, the frightened baby buried into the dark nest of hair piled on her shoulders. Liu turned quickly away from them, strode down the road between darkening fields. Here and there, a hut with walls of kaoliang stalks tied together stood by the wayside. But the cooperative store was built of bricks. He could see the little one-room building from afar. The lamp had already been lit inside. He wondered what the drivers were doing there. What could they buy in a pokey little place like this? Besides, it would be going back with the truck to Beijing tomorrow. He walked up to the little folding door and pushed it open. Two red-eared men with their backs to him stood drinking at the counter that cut across the cozy yellow-lit room. Inside the counter, there was a chimney stove used to bake sesame cakes and a kneading board and a board for chopping meat, each perched on its own tall stand. Bolts of cloth and bars of soap lined the wall. The clerk was dipping wine out of an earthen jar with a half of a dry gourd. He poured it into the men's blue-rimmed pea-green bowls. Liu went up and slid an arm about the shoulders of both the driver and his assistant. "Come along, dinner's ready," he said. "You people should know your way about around here." "Have a drink with us, comrade," says the flushed driver. "You need something to drive out the cold after getting soaked to the skin the way you have." No danger of catching cold in this weather," Liu said, laughing. "You about finished? Dinner's ready." They paid and drifted out after him. Right after dinner, they made ready to sleep, the men and girls in two separate schoolrooms. Floor space had been cleared for little heaps of gallion stalks arranged in orderly rows. Liu was grateful for his soft palate, though the gallion stalks weren't too fresh and smelled a bit moldy and ratty. The darkness was loud, with the long-drawn squeaks of night insects in the courtyard and the squawks of frogs after rain. Moonlight coming in through the carved lattice windows fell on the stone-paved floor in little patterns like odd coins, not odd coins, old coins of white jade, round with a square hole in the middle. Yes, those were traditional Chinese coins back in the day. I used to have some, actually. I wonder if I could find any. Those old, really old coins with that. But I'm almost done with the first chapter. So this, I guess, let me not add too many disclaimers. I will just continue. Liu was kept awake by his thoughts and the veteran mosquitoes of autumn. The stone floor under him was pressing harder and harder against his back, and as the night wore on, the moist, cold breath of stone seeped through the straw. Rats scuttled along the beams and chased each other over the floor like a brood of puppies, scattering the men's shoes. He heard the first faint cock crow. The loud snoring around him seemed to have died down, as if the sleeping men were now far away from him. The rats were well over to the other shore of the night, while he still had endless darkness ahead of him. He was filled with impatience with himself. The gallion stalks under him rustled incessantly with his turning. But what woke up Chang Li was probably his clapping his hands to kill mosquitoes. He saw Chang sit up and then walk out of the room, dragging his shoes, probably to relieve himself in the courtyard. After a while, Chang returned to his pallet and sat yawning audibly. The shadowy white of his undershirt stood out against the moist darkness. "You aren't asleep, Comrade Liu?" he asked. "Not used to this kind of accommodations, eh?" Liu was going to say that he couldn't sleep because of the mosquitoes, but the hint of mockery in Chang's voice put his back up. After a slight pause, he said, smiling, "No, I was thinking conditions aren't so simple in this village." "Conditions are never simple anywhere. Why, have you heard anything or noticed anything?" Chang seemed interested. Liu heard the gallion stalks rustle as the other man groped around his pallet for cigarettes. A match rasped, and Liu watched Chang light a cigarette. Chang held the match up. "You smoke?" Coming over to get a cigarette, Liu sat down beside Chang and told him about the villagers gathered on the truck, what they said about the land reform. Chang laughed when he heard that at 7 Mile Fort, the Gambu had availed themselves of the landlord's padded blankets before he was even struggled against. "Some of the Gambu have gone corrupt, there's no doubt of that. All they're after is luxury, enjoyment of life. But we can't carry out this work all by ourselves. Got to rely on the Gambu. We must use this work to educate the Gambu." His voice was firm and yet light-hearted. It did Liu good to listen to him in the dark. "And the farmers, aye," Chang signed, half laughing. "They've always been backward. You can't imagine how foolish they are at heart. They don't know good from bad. Often take the enemy of the good for a good. Often take the enemy of the people for a good man. All they ever see is a bit of material advantage right in front of them. Short-sighted. They swing with the wind and it makes them unreliable, full of change of weatherism. thinking that no government can last. Everything passes away like a spell of good or bad weather. So they're afraid to be active, afraid even to take things given to them for free, in case the old government will come back and take revenge on them. They're such cowards. When a leaf falls, they're scared to crack their heads open. Liu was very much surprised at his low opinion of the farmers. But if they're like this, how are we going to work out this land reform? We can't settle things arbitrarily. We're supposed to follow the route of the masses. Follow the route of the masses means relying on them and stimulating them, helping them, starting thought mobilization. That's a real job. That's our real job, to lead. Liu smoked silently. Yes, he finally said, and after a while, he went back to his pallet and lay down, watching the red tip of his cigarette. The moonlight had crept close to his head. He reached out to it and looked at the dim, ancient milk-white coin in the flat of his palm. He closed his fist gently and then opened it again to look at what he had in his hand. He thought of Sunan sleeping in the next room, perhaps with a jade coin of moonlight balanced on her forehead. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. Chan spat and lay down, squeezing out his cigarette on the stone floor. Now be careful you don't set the galleon stalks on fire, he said, smiling. All right, I think I'm gonna probably end it here. But for those of you who don't know what actual galleon is, so galleon is a Chinese word for sorghum. And let me see here if I can present a little bit, just a little historical. So galleon it looks like this. So a lot of, I guess back then, and probably even now to some degree, it's definitely grown in China frequently. So sorghum is the world's fifth most cereal crop after rice, wheat, maize, and barley. So especially in northern China, they're frequently grown. And yeah, they can also be used as bedding apparently. So, and they are. Let me see. Yeah. So let's see. Oh yeah. As of 2020, China is the world's largest sorghum importer, importing more than all other countries combined. So, yeah. So it's complementary livestock fed to its domestically grown maize. So it's also used to feed animals, livestock. So the grain is used as food by humans, while the plant is used for animal feed. And so galleon liquor is made from galleon sorghum. So yep. In any case, that was chapter 1. Hopefully you enjoyed it to some degree. This book itself, it actually has, as most books do, it has many chapters. Actually has 32 chapters, but every chapter is only about 6 pages or so. So this book itself is 312 pages. I have read to page 16. So I plan to read some more later, but for now we will take a pause. So let me know how you like my reading style. If you wish to give feedback, I'm always all ears. And I am just sharing random facts as well during the middle of it, in terms of some historical backgrounds, author's background, and just now talking about sorghum. So I try to use Chinese pronunciation whenever possible when I know what it is. I don't always know what it is, so sometimes I'm just reading as it states. So, all right, with that, let me just end it right here. Feel free to tune back in later.